Hello again! The door. I have made a rough sketch of the door. So I've placed a piece of paper behind the door frame, which is already installed. It is easier if you make the door first and then adjust the door frame to the door accordingly. But I've already done the door frame. So I've just drawn around it with a pencil, and then I made a little crude sketch of how I would like the door to look. And it's similar to this one, and as you can see, it's much bigger. So I have to adjust the scale a little. And I also have to adjust the size of the door to the floor, because as you can see, there is no floor here yet underneath the door, but it is in the room, so I'll have to continue with the floor. And I measured it, and it's about 1.6 millimeters thick, so that will have to come off the total height of the door. Now I will transfer this and do more measurements to some graph paper to make sure it's correct, because of course this is just a sketch to look at a proportion and scale. And I like it like this, so that's what I'll continue with. Now, my bedroom and the door, of course, is based on a late 18th century design. And it's not historically correct, but I do like to reference historical buildings, and in this case, doors. And in the Netherlands in the 18th century, doors had 1 or 2 panels. And in the 17th century, they had more panels, so 6 to 8 panels, and they were made from oak. And in the 18th century, they made the doors from lighter wood, like pine and or spruce. And they had 2 panels or 1. So I'm going for the 2 panels. Okay, let's see. I think I'll keep it like that. And then if I have to adjust the height of the door because of the flooring, I'll cut it off at the bottom. Yeah, happy with that. I've checked the measurements of the door against the door frame with my calipers, and it's correct. The width is correct and the height is correct. And so now I've done all the measurements in the drawing as well. And I'm going to cut the door stiles, that's these 2 on the outside. And the width of the door stile is 18.5 millimeters and the height is 930. And of course, in your door, those measurements can be different because we're not making the same door. And I've set my calipers to the width of the door stile, and it's 18.5, and I'm now going to cut them. And I'm using 3.2 millimeter lime wood for that. And I know last week I said it was 4, but it's 3.2 millimeters. I must not have been wearing my glasses that time. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm going to cut the wood on my wonderful Jim Burns table saw. I love this machine. This is really great. And I have to set the fence to 18.5 millimeters. And I still have my calipers set to that size. And I'm going to use that to set the fence as well. So I'll just put that in there between the fence and the blade and slide my fence against it. And then there you have 18.5 millimeters. So that should be great. So now I can saw this. Don't need that. I have to cut this off first, and I'll do that on my Proxxon. I use this for heavier cuts or cross cuts. And this is just to cut this to length a little bit. Now this is the length for the door stiles, and then I'll need two of those. I probably have to put in a new blade. I've used it so much. Now, one more. I have cut the two door stiles and I've left them a little bit longer because we're still going to do a little bit of work to them. And now it's time to cut the door rails, the bottom rail, middle and the top rail, and the two door panels. And those are cut a little bit wider than the measurements on the drawing indicate. So instead of 5.5, we will cut them a millimeter wider on each side, so that will be 5.7, because they will slide inside the door stiles eventually, like you can see on this video. And I'll be using my table saw to cut the edges on the panels and on the door rails. And these edges, which will go inside the door stiles, like here, I've actually measured the width of my table saw blade, which was 1.6 millimeters, as you can see here. And so instead of a millimeter, I decided to put 1.5 millimeters on each side. I've written a little list of what I have to cut. So I'm going to cut the top and the bottom rail, and they were 5.5 wide in my drawing, and I'm adding 1.5 millimeters on each side, so that's going to be 5.8. And I've got two, so it will be 5.8 by 2.5, that's the height, and the height will remain the same on the rails. So 2 times top and bottom rail, and the middle rail is 2 centimeters high and will be 5.5 plus 3 millimeters, so 1.5 on each side is 5.8. And then the two panels, the same thing, the width will be 5.8, 5.8, and the bottom panel as well, the width will be 5.8. And on the panels you have to add 1.5 millimeters, or however wide your blade is or whatever you're using, to the top and the bottom as well, because they will slide inside these panels, inside the rails. So you need a little bit extra there as well, not just to the sides but to the height as well. So that was 9, and so we add 1.5 on each side, which is 9.3, and on the bottom it was 5 high, add 1.5 on top and bottom, so that is 5.3. So I think once you start doing it, it will become clearer, and then you can see in your head or understand why you need these extra bits. So let's cut this now. There we are. I've cut all the panels. Here is the top rail, middle rail and the bottom rail, and here is the bottom panel and the top panel. And as you can see, for the grain of the wood, on the door styles it's running top to bottom, and on the panels as well, also top to bottom, and on the door rails it's running left to right. But that's up to you. I just like it that way, and I find it easier to cut the door styles that way. By the way, on my old door in my workshop, it's done similarly. Door rail, the grain is running top to bottom, or bottom to top, whatever. The door rail, the grain is running left to right. The only thing is the panels are also there. The grain is also running left to right, and I've done it top to bottom. So that's up to you. And next we're going to cut a groove or a channel here in the sides of the door stiles, right there in the center, and on the other side as well, of course, in here. And this is where the door rails and the door panels will slide into. Now I will be using my table saw for that, and I will set the fence close to the saw blade and make sure that the blade is going to come exactly in the middle. And of course I'm not going to try that on my door stiles, and I just have a little bit of an offcut of the same wood, and I'm going to see whether I can get it in the center or not. Well, I will be able to get it in the center. And of course also the saw blade has to go down, because we only need about 1.5 millimeters, because that's what we were, or maybe a little bit deeper, but not much. So I'm just going to set the depth gauge of my calipers, and then I'll see how big the blade is going to be. It should be okay. So the depth is okay now, and now I need to make sure that it is going to be in the center. And that just takes a little bit of trial and error. Now that looks like it is in the center, like that. So I'll just make a test cut. There it is. It looks fairly well in the middle, but what I always do after I've cut this once, I always turn the wood around and do it again, because then you'll know that the cut will be exactly in the center. There we are. Now to me it looks like it is a little bit too narrow, because we're going to slide the panels in here. So I think it needs to be a little bit wider. So I'm going to set the fence again And I'm just going to move it over a tiny bit. That looks good. And you'll notice I use a bit of wood to hold it against it, because if I use my finger here, that's going to be pretty close to the blade, and you don't really want that. So to keep my fingers out of the way, I just push a bit of wood against it and then run it. Now, you will have noticed that I do not have a blade guard on my saw blade. And that's because I cannot see what I'm doing if the blade guard is on. And you also cannot set your fence close to the blade if the blade guard is on. So that's why it's off. But I have to tell you, it is dangerous, because that saw blade will just as easily cut off your fingers as it will cut off a piece of wood. So every safety manual will always tell you, and I should tell you, that you should keep the safety guard or the blade guard on there, which is not to say that with a blade guard it cannot cut your fingers, because then it can still cut off your fingers, but it is safer. Now that looks good. So now I'll cut the real thing. There it is. Channels or the grooves are cut. And now we move to the rails and the panels. And for the next step, I'm going to use my Proxxon table saw, which has a wider saw blade set in it than my other table saw. First of all, I have to set the height of the blade, and I want to leave a little bit of wood in the middle, because this is the test piece. So I'm going to cut a little bit off on each side, and then I have to leave a little bit in the center. I have to have 1/3 of the thickness of the wood. That's going to be the height of the blade. And this one was 3.2, so 1 millimeter is going to be enough. So I'll just set it to 1 millimeter. Should be okay. And now I have to set the fence, and that has to be as close to the saw blade as possible. And I just use a bit of paper to put that in between. And the annoying thing with the Proxxon is that the fence is not connected here on the other side, so it has a tendency to tilt a little bit, so you have to keep adjusting it until it's correct. I think it is. Now I'm going to try it out. I need my ear defenders because this machine is really loud. There. Now that's not deep enough at all, so I have to raise the blade a little bit, tiny bit. Try it again. Now here, you see that little corner that came out? That's because that was the groove here in there. And I cut that away on this side. So that's when the groove is exposed, really. And that's what you want, because then that means that this part will fit in the groove. And we can check. Here's the door style. which I cut, and that fits in there. So that's just what I want. So that's good. So and now I can cut all the other pieces. And what I forgot to do is that I have to cut a groove in some of the panels as well. So the bottom panel has one cut and the top one as well. And then the middle panel has grooves both on both sides. So I'll do that now. That's finished. I've given the 3 rails the grooves as well. So the middle one has one on both sides, and the bottom one and the top one both have one. And then I gave it a quick sand, and when you do that, just use a sanding block, because you want the edges to remain crisp and not rounded. And if you just use a bit of sandpaper, you're very likely to round all the edges, and you don't want that. So those are finished, and they should fit together like that. Yeah, like a glove. That's perfect. Now the next step is to cut a nice edge onto the panels, and you can see that I did that here on this door as well. And for that I have to take my panels over to my milling machine. I've chosen to use this router bit. I think it will go nicely. It will create a nice curve. So I'll put that in there. Tighten that. And then I can start having a look at where I want the bit to go and set up my machine. But I'm not going to cut my door panels, because I'm going to use a bit of scrap wood first and try it out. I'll leave my ear defenders, and I'm going to turn on the dust extractor, because I don't, there's a lot of dust there, so. Well, first cut, that actually looks really good already. I think I'll try that on my rear panels. I'll try one more on the Well, I must say that was pretty lucky, because normally I have to, with my test piece, you have to go back and forth and up and down and see which cut is the best. This was just lucky that the first cut was the right one. So I'll go with the other panel as well. Now, they should fit together like a little puzzle, like that. I love this part. Now, I did notice that here, between the stiles and the rails, there's a tiny gap, and that's because the groove in the stiles isn't deep enough. So I'll have to make those a little bit deeper. And here it's not really necessary, the grooves in here, because they're the same depth. But here on the connection between the stile and the rails, it has to be tight. So I'm just going to adjust that. That was a quick fix. And now let's see if it fits. Yeah, that's much better. Perfect. So now I'm going to sand everything again a little bit, and again make sure that you don't round off the edges except for the edge here on the door panels. That can, of course, is round. Keep the shape, keep it crisp, but just sand it a little bit so it's smoother. And then after I've sanded all that, I'm going to make the bottom nice and straight, sand that, and then glue it all together. So now I just glue everything together because I've sanded it all, and it's looking quite nice and smooth. Here's a little. And I said I would take it off if the door is too long, I'm going to take it off the bottom. So I'm going to keep the top absolutely straight. So get my gluing jig and put it in there and glue this all together. And it will be beautiful. So here is my lovely homemade gluing jig. And I can just use that because it's big enough. And I can use that to glue my door together. I just wanted to show you this. Let me turn off my fan. It's really hot again today. I just wanted to show you this. Need some good light. The way it looks before you glue it. Or before you glue the side, this door style onto it. And I always love that, the way that the construction is. And it gives you a good idea of what it should look like. Let me continue to glue that. That's the last one. That just needs some glue in here. I think I need to fill up my glue bottle again. And as you probably saw just now, if there's any glue oozing out, I always take a damp brush and brush it away. I can't really see if there is any because it's not. Turn that around. There isn't any glue spilling out here. Maybe on the other side. You never know. No, there isn't. Good. Now I just have to put something heavy on there and let it dry. Good. Well, the door is finished. Well, not entirely finished. Still needs a lot of work, like paint and all that. But it's looking really good, and it's just slightly too tall. I told you I would take it off the bottom, but I think I will take a little bit off the top. So I'll turn it around and score that line at the top. And then take off the excess so it won't. Well, I can almost turn it. So it's just a little bit that needs to come off. But, and then it's time for the hinges. Now, as you can see, and I'm saying this, I sound like a broken record, but this video is already way too long. And it's not just that I think it's just too long to watch because you'll get tired. But also I have to edit it. And the longer the video, that's a lot of work. So I'm sorry for those of you who are waiting for the hinging part, but that will have to wait till next week. So for now, I will do some painting of the door, and then I'll see you next time. Until next time.